You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi guys, and welcome back one and all to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, sponsored by Trailtopia. As you've now heard at the beginning of the show, this podcast is part of the brand spanking new Hiking Radio Network. While there are currently only 2 shows in the network right now, I'm in the throes of adding 3 and possibly 4 more shows in the coming months. Nothing is set in stone, but I hope to have some wonderful news for you all in a week or so. Today, on episode 76, I'm delighted to welcome a familiar face from the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, Laurie Potteiger. Laurie is well known to all Appalachian Trail hikers. Her official title is Information Services Manager, yet she is the friendly face of the ATC office in Harpers Ferry and a fierce advocate of the trail. She's steeped in hiking and hiking the Appalachian Trail in particular. Heck, she even met her future husband at the Conservancy. Laurie will be along shortly. Before we go on though, it is time for brekkie. When I was hiking, I'd wake up to my alarm, deflate my AirPad and contemplate my blah breakfast. Every morning I poured water into those different coloured paper bags, scrunch around the ingredients, not one of which had any association with fruit, and then eat that soulless gunk. I then find unhydrated powder and sugar in the crevices of the bag. Trailtopia's blueberry oatmeal is a bit of a novelty because it actually has real blueberries. Who'da thunk? No gunk. It tastes great. The bag design ensures complete hydration and it really sets you up for the day. Try Trailtopia Adventure Food, the best of home cooking away from home. We're going to be having Dr. Lynn on one last time next week when the two of us are going to conclude our conversation about the phenomenon of post-trail depression. We've had some interesting comments on the Facebook page, and I've collated those to come up with a few, what we hope to be coherent, thoughts on the subject. So, instead of the good doctor this week, I have a guest who is a map maker. Keith Meermal heard our show with Blaise Vitali several weeks back when he discussed the Superior Hiking Trail. Keith reached out to me at the end of December to let me know that he is finishing a complete map of the Superior Hiking Trail, which itself is a section of the North Country Trail. He asked if I'd like to see the map. Of course, I said yes. So he sent me a copy. It's beautiful. So I invited him on to talk about his map. Keith will be on after Laurie. Several people have asked me about the Mighty Blue shirt that I wear from time to time, and have even asked if they could buy one. I've never really done much about merch, as they call it, but I found a really good system at my recent podcasting event. So, if you'd like to buy t-shirts, mugs, or even baby onesies, whatever they are, emblazoned with Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, you can now get them in any size of pretty much any colour. I'll have a link to the store in the show notes. Now, I should point out that this is the second time that I recorded Laurie Potteiger. Both times she was a delight. Unfortunately, I messed up the audio first time and had to ask her to do it again. Luckily for me, my 65-year-old memory allowed me to remember pretty much nothing from our first conversation, so it all sounds pretty fresh to me. Here is the lovely Laurie Potteiger. Okay, I'm back on with Laurie Potteiger. Laurie and I tried to record a couple of weeks ago, but I totally messed up the recording, so I apologise for that. And it's lovely to speak with you again. Laurie, how are you?
I'm doing great. So glad to be talking to you again, Steve.
You're the second person. You've got your second interview within a couple of weeks, so that's unusual for the podcast. And you are one of the more you're one of the more public faces of the ATC, and you're head of visitor services for the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. And we are going to come back to the ATC shortly. But how did you get involved in hiking in the first place?
Well, I was really fortunate. My father was an avid hiker and trail maintainer with a local Appalachian Trail Maintaining Club, the PATC, Potomac Appalachian Trail Club. So I grew up spending our vacations in the outdoors. I didn't do any backpacking, but we would spend our summer vacations at the Potomac Appalachian Trail Club cabins, often in Shenandoah National Park. And I just
Nice.
got a familiarity, and comfort level and love of the woods at an early age. So hiking was just a natural part of my family vacations.
Yeah. So what is it? I had this recently with a number of people. What is it about being in the woods that soothes people so much? Is it the smell? Is it the sound, or the lack of sound, or even just the disconnection with other things?
It's a little bit of everything. It's all the senses. It's quiet and stillness compared to the city, but yet the woods are alive with sounds. With sometimes you don't even know what they are, and that's what's part of the thrill. Is they're little tiny miniscopic creatures and insects buzzing around and
Yes.
birds flying. Sometimes you can hear them, but you can't see them, and there might be bears or bobcats just out of sight around a tree or something. It's just everything is kind of filled with mystery and wonder, as opposed to being indoors in the city where you're just looking at four dry walls around you and everything is predictable and the same. The woods, every place you look, it's different. There are no two places that you set your eyes in the woods that are
That's
the
right.
same. So
Yeah.
it just fills your senses in a completely different way.
Were you ever afraid of animals in the woods, or did you immediately become relaxed about them? Because I certainly was, until I saw bears, and I thought, oh my gosh, they don't want to know me at all. So I'm okay. I didn't have to worry about them anymore. Were you okay with them straight away?
Oh, generally, my twin brother and I, remember we did some things. Maybe they're not too leave no trace appropriate now, but we
Careful.
would play with. No, we would play with little animals in the spring in the creeks, and snakes. I remember slipping a snake in my pocket
Oh my gosh.
on the car ride home, and somehow it disappeared. I never knew where it went. But no, I had a comfort level at an early age, and I think being exposed just really makes it easier for you to enjoy the woods. And as you learn the species, then you see all the nuances and get to know them like friends. All the different types of animals and plants.
Yeah.
It's wonderful to be exposed to them, but you can at any age for sure.
Okay. Now, I know you attempted a thru-hike of the AT in 1987. Can you give us a sense of, and you must be almost uniquely qualified to say this, can you give us a sense of what the trail was like 30 years ago, particularly as opposed to what it's like now? Or is it just the same?
Well, there's some elements that are the same, but a lot that are different.
Uh-huh.
So the trail was not nearly as crowded. I mean, crowding was just, that was not a word that ever went together with the Appalachian Trail. I think in my whole hike from Georgia into the 100-mile wilderness, there was only one time I came to a shelter that was full, and that was when there was a group of Boy Scouts.
There are a lot of those. There are a lot of those on the trail, aren't there?
Yeah. So there just weren't as many people using it. It wasn't as well known. Thru-hikers were kind of a rare breed back then. The trail was not as well known in communities. So there were people that lived in towns that didn't know about the trail, and there's still that case today, but the trail is so much better known, everywhere on nearby towns, throughout the world. And that was not the case back then. And the physical trail has changed a lot. I don't know if you want to talk about that now or come back
Yes,
to
absolutely.
that.
No, absolutely. Talk about how the physical trail has changed then.
Well, a lot of the trail used to be on woods roads and paved roads. Right. So it was not, even though the East Coast was not as developed as it is now, you were in civilization or closer to it a lot of the time, walking past people's houses and also walking on, perfectly flat terrain. And in some respects, the trail now is more rugged because virtually all of those sections have been relocated now to a more primitive footpath that is generally going up or around a mountain, whereas before it was down in the valley or on a flat ridge. And
So it's changed
today,
that much.
you
Has
really,
it changed that much over the years then, where they've relocated so much that I'd imagine, because one of the statistics I hear is that it's got an elevation gain of 16 times Mount Everest, which is nearly half a million feet of elevation. Did you have any idea of what the elevation was like back when you did it 30 years ago?
well, I really think there was probably not as much elevation change as there is now, because the trail has gotten longer as a result of those relocations. And basically, the many hundreds of miles have gotten harder, although the hardest parts have gotten easier. The more dangerous places are the really steep, unsustainable places in the south. So it's a mix.
How did that happen? How did that happen then? How do they make them more sustainable?
Well, let's say the original trail was built from point A at the bottom of the mountain to the straightest line to the top.
Oh dear me.
And that causes erosion, and it's not good for hikers, and the trail doesn't last long, and then you get a lot of soil eroding down the mountain. And then typically the fix for that may be building switchbacks, and technically it's what they call side hill trail, but it's easier on the hiker, easier on the mountain, easier on the water systems. So it's win-win.
When we were going through Georgia, everybody said, you watch out for when you get to New Hampshire and Maine. It's straight up like it used to be here. So I'm sure people related to that. When we got to New Hampshire, I think we were all fit enough by then to be able to go up those mountains. So it was that's the way I'm so glad I did it that way round. I think if I started on New Hampshire and Maine, I would never have got past those two states, because I just wouldn't have been able to make it, I don't think.
They're so much more challenging. But
oh my gosh, yeah.
An interesting point of comparison is Ed Garvey, who hiked the trail back in 1970, said that the hardest part of the trail was actually in the Nantahala region of North Carolina, the Stokoas, because the trail was so much steeper than it is now. And if you look closely in a lot of places, you can see the original trail going straight up between the switchbacks.
Wow. I remember that climb out of Nantahala very well. And I had switchbacks, so God knows what it was like before. It was a nightmare going out of Nantahala for me, in the rain as well. I remember that very well.
Yeah, and I bet you had a heavy pack too.
45 pounds. What was your pack back then?
I was considered very light back in the day. I started with 33 pounds at Springer, which, with a very heavy external frame pack, which weighed about 5 pounds. And it was bigger than I needed. But I was much lighter than all the other people I knew that started around then. And by the mid-Atlantic, I was down in the 20s. And then I got into the 40s in Maine when I had to carry winter clothing with, old-fashioned wool and things that were a lot heavier.
It's interesting when you take the opportunity to do a shakedown, and I had to come home for 10 days when I got bitten by a dog. Actually, my pack wasn't 45; it was 42 pounds. But when I went back to the trail, I'd knocked off 7 pounds from that 42 pounds. So it shows you how much unnecessary stuff people tend to take with them, don't they? And you really need to pare back as much as possible. Now, I understand that you had to get off the trail in the 100-mile wilderness. What happened to you?
Well, I ended up walking with a fellow who just got really, really sick. He probably got bad water or something, but he spent a day in a shelter just vomiting and having diarrhea. Who knows, maybe it was norovirus. Yeah. But I stayed with him for a couple of days, and he really needed medical attention, and so we decided we needed to walk back to the nearest road and hitch out to get medical attention. And it was already on the late side. It was kind of mid-late October, and it was just too late for me to go back by myself. So it all ended well, though. Not as planned, but it was an ending I would not have traded for anything. Because I came to ATC in Harper's Ferry and met my future husband and waited for him to marry me and go back and finish that section of trail together.
I just recall actually the conversation we had before about that. I totally misunderstood that. I thought you married the guy who had the diarrhea.
No. No.
That's funny. Now, did you do any other long distance trails, and do you still hike much?
I do, but I pretty much only hike the AT. I'm a one-man woman and a one-trail woman.
Nicely
I
put.
have hiked I've hiked the Foothills Trail, most of it, because I wanted to see if there were alternatives for people to explore for spring break, like March. I
Sure.
mean, even 20 years ago, we recognized there were a lot of people on the trail in Georgia, the combination of thru-hikers and spring break hikers in March and April. And so I checked it out, and it actually is a really nice alternative because your weather is much more temperate. Chance of snow is pretty slim, and they've got wildflowers blooming while it's still completely dead and brown up on the trail. But since my Georgia to Maine hike in '87, I've almost completed the trail a second time doing sections, taking my vacations, hiking a week or two at a time, and I've got about 150 miles to go to finish the trail for the second time.
Are you doing that in order, or are you doing Georgia, Maine again, or what parts have you still got to do?
Mostly pieces in Maine, but a little piece in New York and a little piece in New Hampshire.
Nice. And when do you think you'll finish that?
Maybe this year.
Oh, cool.
Maybe next year.
You're not going to go for a third. You're going to go for a third one.
Of course.
Of course you are.
Why wouldn't you? But I have to say the beauty of section hiking, and the reason I didn't do it in order, was I could choose the very best time to go each section. That's true. So as a thru-hiker, you just got to take it as it comes and just keep plowing through the good and the bad and the ugly. Whereas as a section hiker, I got to enjoy each place at its prime, whether that was spring wildflowers or fall colors or, warm weather in Maine where it was warm enough to swim in the lakes and the stream crossings weren't freezing. And so, I just got the best of everything as a section hiker.
That's an interesting thought. I'd never even considered that. But of course you can. Yes, you can literally choose the best time to go. So, what a lovely thing to be able to do. Now, I think there's a bit of a clue in what you said earlier on. But how did you actually become part of the Appalachian Trail Conservancy? Well,
I learned about the ATC as I was preparing for my thru-hike. Even though I'd grown up hiking, I was really active in the Potomac Appalachian Trail Club. My father was really involved. I had never even heard of the ATC, and here I lived outside D.C. where they were based until 1972. But anyway, as I was researching my thru-hike, I met a former thru-hiker who said, there's this organization. It's the umbrella for all the trail clubs, and if you're doing a thru-hike, you should contact them. And furthermore, you should become an ATC member, and you should go up there to their headquarters now in Harper's Ferry and volunteer. And so that's what I did. When I came up here to volunteer, I met my future husband, not knowing that. And out of that, I ended up getting a job, the place that I would live, and my husband, I think it's like good trail karma that I was willing to kind of help the trail before I started, and I got all these wonderful rewards.
Wonderful. So what is your official brief within the Conservancy? Because you are probably one of the, if not the best known person in the ATC. What is your actual brief?
Well, basically, I oversee most of the public hiking information and all that goes along with that. Although I will say that the regions are the specialists. They know the most about each particular area of the trail, but in terms of having a generalist about the trail, that's me and all the things that go along with that. And one thing that's always of interest to people is the 2,000-miler recognition and records, although actually I'm sort of transitioning that to another staff member. Right. But we do keep statistics on people that do the whole trail. In fact, those are the only real statistics we have over time of trail users are the 2,000-milers. So that tells us about trends of trail use over the years. So it's important to keep those statistics.
I've heard so many different statistics, though. What is, people say normally about 1 in 4 people finish. Do you think that's a realistic number, or are people making stuff up, or what do you think the number is?
Oh, it's, these days we have pretty good numbers. It's getting closer to 1 in 3 most years.
Right. Cool.
And then the percent that actually start in Georgia and then comparing that to the number that sign in Baxter State Park is actually even higher than 1 in 3.
Wow.
So what we look at is the official completion rate is the number that start in Georgia versus those who report to us as having completed the whole thing and signing a statement that, yes, I walked the entire trail. Whereas in Baxter State Park, I think if you did most of the trail from Georgia to Maine, you'll sign in as a thru hiker. But I think our process filters out some of the people that maybe didn't do the whole trail but did most of it. Anyway, back to your question. I think it's getting close to 1 in 3 that do complete the trail.
And I presume that's because
between 1 in 4 and 1 in 3.
Because it's lighter, more accessible these days, I guess, with shuttles and the ease of contact with home and the whole thing of making the trail a little bit easier. I would think that was why. Do you think that makes the trail a better experience now, or do you feel it's not such a good experience?
Well, I think it's a mix. I think a lot of people really enjoy the social experience, the ability to just be surrounded by like-minded but very different people. I mean, that's what the trail is known for, is just that how you just can engage with other people so easily and so quickly, and people are so supportive of each other. Yeah. But there are problems with overcrowding in some places.
Right.
But we're really working on that. There are ways that you can address that, and a lot of the things that we do are focused on trying to spread people out or help them learn practices to minimize their impacts and be more sustainable in the way that they hike, or hardening the trail. There are just a lot of different things that you can do creatively to manage a greater number of people, because most parts of the trail, most of the time, are not crowded. The vast majority, in fact, of the places on the trail most of the time. So there are plenty of solutions, and there's room for a lot more people to enjoy the trail than do now, but just not at the hot spots.
Do you feel the hiking constituency is engaged with the efforts of the ATC?
I think it's a growing percentage all the time, and I think each year we take more strides. We have new initiatives to reach more people, and it's just a process. Like this year, we started something brand new. Just actually last week, we started daily classes at Amicalola Falls State Park, 2 classes a day from now until the end of April, where an experienced hiker will give a talk to the thru hikers that are there, or anybody else that would like to attend, to just focus on the basics of leave no trace and just little tips to help hikers be prepared. They also do pack shakedowns when they're available, so that hikers aren't carrying that extra gear, and the more gear you carry, the more likely you are to be injured or quit or something like that. So we're expanding our efforts all the time, using all possible media.
How are hikers taken to these classes? I think, to be honest with you, I wish I'd had that when I went. I had no idea what to expect. I mean, I'd read all the books, but I genuinely believe nothing prepares you for this. You can read as much as you like until you're actually standing at the top of that mountain, ready to put your tent up for the first night. Then I could never have imagined what it would be like. And I was right. Whatever I was imagining was wrong. I had that first night setting my tent up, and I remember lying in my sleeping bag thinking, oh my gosh, it's getting dark out there. And it was getting darker and quieter. And then, of course, you have to get up in the middle of the night to go for a pee. And it's just it's a whole experience I never would have imagined. So having classes at the bottom at Amicalola would have been wonderful for me. So what are people thinking about it? How are they reacting to these classes?
Well, this is just the first week, you see.
All right.
So we found that people are very anxious to hit the trail.
Yes.
And I think probably most of the people coming don't yet know that they're happening, so they haven't really built them into their schedule. So the people showing up initially are not eager to spend a lot of time in a class. I think but I think I've been hearing they're going really well, and if you've got 10 or 30 minutes to educate people a little before they start, give them some tips and some food for thought, I think anything you can do will help. As we get to publicize these classes more and they're better known, then people can kind of build them into their schedule and have more time to absorb. But that's not going to be adequate preparation to be a successful thru-hike by any means. But I kind of disagree that you can't prepare for the trail. I know that that's a common statement, but to give you an example, I just talked to a southbounder who hiked last year, who did so much preparation for her southbound thru-hike that she actually said it was easier than expected, and everything went really smoothly because she decided she planned her practice hikes and waited till she saw a rain forecast and wouldn't go out and test her gear until it was raining. And then she did the Oregon Coast Trail as some preparation in advance of her thru-hike, and she read everything she could. And imagine starting a southbound thru-hike and saying it was everything went smoothly and it was easier than expected, because she spent a whole year preparing and getting out there in the woods and testing her gear and tweaking it. So to me, that's a real life example that you can prepare. And, shakedown hikes are something that are really valuable, that you go out for 2 or 3 days. You realize your mistakes, you go tweak, you see what you don't need. It can really make a huge difference.
I'm sure it can if you put a hell of a lot of time into it. And I know that on our sister podcast, Return to Katahdin, Bruce Matson starts this weekend, and he has prepared so much. And I didn't have the time. I decided I was going to go, I confirmed I was going to go in December, and I was away in March. And I've said to a number of people, I think, had I known the impact it was going to have on me, I'm not sure I would have actually done it. It was far harder than I ever imagined it was going to be. But it was the most rewarding trip. So I'm obviously glad I did it. But I think, if someone said to me, "You're going to fall over, you're going to be bitten by a dog, you're going to bleed everywhere, and you're going to all sorts of stuff." Yeah, all those things happen, and I counted every single fall, and I shouted out the number of the fall each time, and I ended up at 45. That's a proper fall as well. With your 30-year perspective of the trail, what do you think are the major changes that have happened? Not to the trail itself, to the way in which people approach the trail from the way they did in the past. Is lightweight really the thing that's just going to keep driving this forward and forward and forward?
Well, definitely. People come with much lighter and more sophisticated gear, and there is so much more information available. Yeah. I mean, you can find 100 opinions on every topic and a choice of 100 different backpacks or sleeping bags. So actually, there's so much information. Information overload is sometimes a complaint, but people do have the ability to educate themselves, even if they don't live close to, say, an REI or major backpacking store where they have classes, because, increasingly there's resources through the internet that you can do, interactive classes online, or somebody does something streaming, their podcasts, their websites with articles coming out every day. So people do have the tools to be better prepared and informed and better stewards of the trail and learn all about Leave No Trace before they even hit the trail. So I think if we're successful, we'll be able to educate more and more people to be sustainable users of the trail before they even get there, so that the trail can accommodate more people, and more people will be able to enjoy the Appalachian Trail experience without harming the trail. So to me, that's the ultimate goal.
I know that ATC are really working on a number of initiatives, which I'd like you to talk to if you could. And there's 3 that I've got here, one of which, and actually this came to a degree from, I only discovered this when I interviewed one of my previous guests, and she was just trying to touch each of the 14 states. But one of my listeners said there is actually a 14-state challenge that the ATC are encouraging. So tell us about the 14-state challenge.
Yeah, well, the idea is that you just visit a piece of the trail in each of the 14 states, and how much you do is up to you. And it could be 1 mile, it could be 10 miles, it could be an overnight, or for someone that maybe has impairments or disabilities, it could be just coming up to the trail and passing by a single white blaze.
Right.
Just so that, we want people to know that it's there for all Americans, that so many people say like, oh, I can't do a thru hike. I could never do the Appalachian Trail because I don't have 6 months or I'm not an athlete. And really it's a national park. It was designed for anyone who wanted to enjoy the outdoors, who just needed an escape from the city to be, re-inspired by being in nature. And, it's so accessible. It's the most accessible national park in the United States, accessible with a small a, in the sense that it's easy to get to. There are 500 access points, and it's within, I think it's within a day's drive of 2/3 of the U.S. population. And then
Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing statistic? I've heard that before. That's extraordinary.
Yeah. And then it's just like an hour or two's drive of maybe, and this is a rough estimate, maybe 50 million people live close enough that they could do a day hike. So it's in the backyard of the eastern U.S. And, it's just so inspiring. It changes people's lives. And often that's on a thru hike, but sometimes people have just very short, day hikes you can have a life-changing experience even one day on the Appalachian Trail. And we don't want anyone to miss that because they think it's beyond their capability.
Yeah, I hear from my listeners all the time that it's our guests on the show reminding them how accessible it is that inspires quite a few of them to get up and start going on the trail. So, and that might be part of why there are more and more people on the trail, because more and more people are realizing how they can get on the trail. And I love that part of it. I really do. Now, I know the other thing you talked about earlier on is the flip-flop through hikes. And I know that's something to try to stop the bubble building up too early in Georgia. How does the flip-flop through hikes become an initiative? And are many people taking up the opportunity?
Well, doing a flip-flop hike can have some advantages. So if you start somewhere in the middle of the trail, you can wait for winter weather to pass.
Yeah.
And compared to Georgia in March, you have to be prepared for snow and really cold temperatures. But if you wait to start in the middle, like late April or May, then you can, essentially start in spring instead of winter and be well ahead of the bubble. So you can have a nice balance between being too crowded but not being totally alone if you time it right. And then if you start in the middle, you're also starting in the area with the least elevation change. It's not to say it's easy. I've learned that you never say that the Appalachian Trail is easy. It's only easier than other parts. But if you're coming from the context of living in the city with flat sidewalks, it's going to seem really tough. But anyway, if you start in the middle, you can avoid the crowds. You can start in easier terrain. You can have more moderate weather. You avoid starting in winter. You avoid being in the depths of the summer heat that the northbounders are, the heat and humidity that you have in the mid-Atlantic. Yeah. You get to hike north with the spring flowers, but you also get to hike south with the fall colors. And, it's just a different kind of experience, and it may be not the right thing for everyone, but if some people find it works for them, let's just promote this as an option and give people a choice if they don't want to start in the crowds or they don't want to start in winter conditions. And we've really seen an increase in flip-floppers in the last few years.
Oh, you have? Good. So people are listening. And are they doing it because it's encouraged? Or are they doing it because they think it's a nice idea to stay away from the crowds and they want a little bit more solitude?
Usually it's a mix. I think it's a combination of, timing when they're available. It's wanting to do something to help conserve the trail. It's wanting to avoid the bubble, the party crowd. Maybe they've heard about the norovirus. It's so prevalent among the northbound thru hikers with those crowds. It's usually a mix of factors. Okay.
So the AT camp we want to talk about now. You do this overnight through and group through hiker registration. Tell us more about the AT camp.
Well, the system allows people to register where they're going to be each night. They can do just one night or they can do as many nights as they want. Thru hikers, we suggest if they're starting in Georgia to do at least the first 3 nights because it is so crowded down there. It helps with the numbers, but it allows everyone to see where the most crowded areas are, and then if they choose to amend their plan so they can have a less crowded experience.
Is there a maximum a number of people who can go at any one time?
We do have a set maximum or a quota for each campsite, but it's not a strict quota. It's just letting people know the maximum ideal number of people at this place has been reached. You're not going to be turned away, but you're going to find a full campsite. So you probably want to choose something else. We're not going to let you register for it. There's not going to be a ranger that's going to prohibit you from accessing that site, unless it's a system unique to a particular area like the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. That's one exception. But for the rest of the trail, with a few exceptions, it's all voluntary. It's just to give people the information they need to make good choices to help the trail be sustainable.
I mean, it's all about helping the trail be sustainable. So anything like that, hikers should absolutely embrace, shouldn't they?
Yes. There's a lot people can do voluntarily, and that's the tradition of the AT. Is the ATC, together with our Park Service partners and others who manage the trail, really, it's our goal to have as little regulation as possible and to give hikers the tools and information they need to help be sustainable hikers. So the more we can educate and provide tools to hikers to inform them, the better. And that's always going to be
Now,
the goal.
I know that you mentioned volunteer. It's a volunteer thing just now. And I know that you and your husband volunteers and do a bit of trail maintaining. There are specific parts of the trail that belong to you, or they're yours and you look after. Where are those parts?
You mean me personally? Me and my husband? Yeah. Well, technically they're not ours, but we do think of them that way.
You should do.
Yeah, we have an official trail assignment from the Potomac Appalachian Trail Club to do 1.2 miles of the trail. It's from Blackburn Trail Center to Wilson Gap. And we really take pride in maintaining it, clearing the blowdowns. As a volunteer, I am certified to use a chainsaw, but I have to go through special, training and then recertification every 3 years. But we clear the blowdowns. We, put in water bars. We make sure the blazes are crisp and at the right intervals. Clear the vegetation that grows up. And just make sure it's in good shape for hikers. But that's only half the story.
I'll come to the other half in a minute. Do you find that there are more blowdowns because of changing weather or not?
Oh, well, that's a great question. I'll tell you what has really changed is the extreme weather events or these microbursts. We found there was one really heavy rainstorm a few years ago that in one episode caused more erosion than the previous 20 years.
Oh, my gosh.
It was just phenomenal. Wow. And we see more and more of that all the time. And so that really causes more erosion. So you need, it's best to have the trail sustainably built in the first place, in which case you don't have to do as many of these modifications. But we have old school trail on the ridge, on the fall line. And so we need an increasing number of water bars and check dams, and those need more and more maintenance. And in terms of developments over time, they're now more invasive species. And just last year, we started to see the effects of the emerald ash borer on our section of trail. And boy, once you learn to recognize the damage, you see these dead trees everywhere. And now we just see the dead trees with these distinct patterns of where the beetles have eaten away the bark. But pretty soon they're going to be falling down across our
That's what I was thinking.
And we're going to have to be bringing our
part of what I was thinking.
There. Yeah.
Man, that's something. You said that's only half the story though. So what was the other half of the story of trail maintaining?
Well, the other half is that we do as volunteers is maintaining sections of the Appalachian Trail boundary. And I think a lot of hikers don't even know about this whole aspect of the trail because if you recall, it is a unit of the National Park System, and for several hundred miles of the trail, there's a 1,000-foot corridor of land that's been acquired by the National Park Service. So the trail is generally in the middle, and 500 feet to one side there's a yellow line of paint. It's almost like another trail on both sides of it, and that marks the boundary between the national park and the private landowners on the other side. And volunteers walk those lines and make sure there's no encroachments occurring, no illegal activities. If there are, they report them to the appropriate law enforcement.
I didn't know that.
Folks,
Interesting.
The chief ranger with the Appalachian National Scenic Trail, and then they make sure that those boundary lines are marked. It's actually yellow paint. It's the type of yellow glazing that's very pure, because you're doing good trail karma when you're following the yellow glazes of the Appalachian Trail boundary. So it's a whole other aspect of volunteering that's really cool, because you're out of sight of the trail usually, but yet you're on the trail corridor. So you feel like you're being a guardian of the trail, protecting it from potential threats. It's quite exciting, and I encourage people to check with their local trail club to see if there's any sections available that they can adopt or go out with a boundary crew.
How cool is that? Well, look, thank you so much for spending the time for a second time to talk to us. I actually enjoyed this conversation even more because I learned so much more this time, and I had no idea about the boundary crew, so I'm delighted to have heard about that, and I'm glad I got it right. You didn't marry the guy with norovirus in the in the 100-mile wilderness, so that's always good as well. But thanks so much for talking to us, and hopefully we'll speak again soon.
Oh, it was a real pleasure, Steve. All the best to you.
Cheers then. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Now there is someone who knows her stuff. I know it's a job, but she came across as having a passion for the trail and everything to do with it. Her role in the Appalachian Trail Conservancy allows her to exercise that passion. How cool is that? I also like the initiatives that the ATC get behind. The reasons behind the push to get more people to flip-flop are clear and do the most amount of good for the trail. While I love that 14-state challenge. I may not have known about it before, but I think it's a wonderful way to allow people to get a taste of the diversity of the trail all the way up the east coast of America. And, almost inevitably, Laurie and her husband are trail maintainers. Of course they are. I love the story about the acceptable kind of yellow blazing. I'd imagine that's quite exciting to see the trail from that entirely different perspective. Now, for the first time on the show, we've got a map maker. Keith Mearmel is going to tell us about his hobby, and I thought it would be a good, slight detour to share his story. This is not a commercial, by the way. I love the map, and he sent it to me, and I wanted him to be able to share it with you. Here is Keith Mearmel. Okay, this is going to be an interesting section, I think. Let's introduce you to Keith Mearmel, Myrmel. Hi, Keith. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing good.
And how do you actually pronounce your last name? You did tell me when we last spoke, but I'm never good at these things. Mearmel?
Well, actually, the way you said it is right. Mearmel is it's a Norwegian name, and that's how they say it. We've grown up in the U.S. here, third-generation American, saying it Mearmel.
All right, I see.
They can say it either way.
Okay. Well, Keith Mearmel or Mearmel. And the Norwegians are known for making maps, as it happens. I know they're great seafarers. And I wonder whether you remember we had a conversation some time ago about the Superior hiking trail. And Keith contacted me soon after and talked about some maps a map that he's doing. And we talked back and forth, and he kindly sent me a copy of the map. And my gosh, it is flipping beautiful. And
thank you.
And I said to Keith, why don't you come on and talk about the map and how you did it? So give me what went into this and why you started doing this in the first place.
Well, it kind of dates back to 1977 when the North Country Trail was kind of first being developed. I worked as an intern for the Chippewa National Forest in Minnesota.
All right.
And had the opportunity to get involved with that and actually designed the first trail marker that was being used.
Oh,
and
nice.
Since then, I've been doing lots of hiking around the country. I've been to all 50 states, plus other countries around the world.
Sure.
And kind of focused in on this trail, recognizing that this is really an elite trail that we've got in the U.S. And the connection with the North Country Trail and the Superior Hiking Trail just fascinated me, and I hiked about 3/4 of it to date.
Oh, all right. How long is the North Country Trail?
The North Country Trail, the length?
Yeah.
Boy, I think it's like over 2,000 miles total.
So it's a proper trail then.
I don't even...
And so the Superior Hiking Trail forms part of that, as I understand it. Yeah. And so what was the initial reason for doing this map, or do you do maps generally?
No, well, I've done some maps as a landscape architect and master planner for camps and things like that. Right. What started this is in hiking the trail and talking to people and then volunteering with the Superior Hiking Trail Association. Okay. People have mentioned that there really isn't a full-length trail of the map that they can sit down and look at or mount on their wall. Right. So I was planning to do a simple map and just lay it out, and so you could mount about a 6-foot-long piece of paper on your wall. Then I started getting into the detail, realizing, oh, shoot, I can put a lot of the detail hikers need to do their planning and actually make this into a waterproof map that they can take and use on the trail.
I must say, it is beautiful, and it's hand-drawn, I presume, in a lot of places. Is it all hand-drawn? Just looking at it.
Yeah, the entire map is hand-drawn, even all the lettering. I'm kind of old school, so and I've always been fascinated with some of the old maps, so I've kind of taken that route on this map. Everything you get these days is digital.
Yes. Well, what I thought was striking was the blue colouring of the water. And I suspect the real thing's not looking like that, but it just shows up. So it's just so arresting. It really is. So talk us through the aspects of what it takes to put together a map like this. How do you research this, and what do you base it upon?
Well, the maps that you can find that show the whole trail have very little detail. Yeah. And in being a hiker, there's, especially if you're doing a through hike or long sections, there's lots of information that you need that really helps to have in one source that you can look at and identify, okay, these are where all the parking areas are. This is where you're close to a town or road access for resupplying. I've even got it down to the detail where all the campsites have tent pads. So each campsite on this map is marked with dots underneath showing the number of tent pads for each of the sites.
I'm interested in that because our trails. This is one of those thought in the moment. Trails are dynamic, though, aren't they? They change. This is a point in time, isn't it? Next year there may not be a tent pad here, and I love that part of it as well. You're frozen a time in history. When does this apply to? Is this right now?
This is right now. The Superior Hiking Trail has a guidebook that they put out. The 8th edition is the new one. And it actually has a major change in a section of the trail. A lot of this trail, I'm sure the Appalachian Trail and others have private property that they're crossing. Mm-hmm. And with an issue that they ran into, they had to do kind of a major change near Gooseberry on the trail. So this has all the updated changes to the trail.
Right. Well, I can tell you one of the things that Keith is going to try to do is send me a higher resolution photo of it. I'm going to put it on both my Mighty Blue Facebook page and also on the Mighty Blue website as well in the show notes. So you can hopefully look at this when he's talking. So I'm looking at it now. You've got North Country Trail and Lake Superior Water Trail. Talk about what that first box is on the left-hand side going down. You haven't got it in front of you, have you? Oh, you have.
The legend? You're talking about the legend?
The legend, yeah. So how do you, talk about that?
Okay, the legend goes through. There's actually two legends because I'm a kayaker as well, so I've been on the Lake Superior Water Trail kayaking along the shoreline of Lake Superior. All right. So there's a legend for that specific information, and then there's a legend for what I call the land trails. Yeah. And I've got a variety of trails besides the North Country Trail on this. And I've identified spur trails to the other trails or to the parking areas, the trailheads. The Border Route Trail is got about 30 plus miles on this, which goes into the Boundary Waters canoe area, wilderness, which is also another asset of Minnesota.
Yeah.
I've de-emphasized the roads on this and really emphasized the rivers. It's a phenomenal stretch of land. There's got to be probably close to 100 rivers that you cross. So you've got spectacular waterfalls and river valleys, and then some mountain peaks that overlook Lake Superior.
Now, I feel I'm looking at this slightly blind, only because the picture I'm zooming in on, I can't see close what they are, and I couldn't hang the map. I tried in front of me while I was recording. I mean, it's a shambles sometimes in this studio here, and I'm trying to work out what some of these things are. You've got this kind of grid pattern all the way around the outside of the map, and that may be a normal map type thing. What talk about those? Because they make it look even more beautiful.
Yeah, in looking at maps, the border of the map really defines the map for you. And I didn't want to do a simple border, and I started getting into. Actually, my daughter got me into kind of thinking about quotes.
Right.
So initially, I was thinking, I created a compass rose, and I put a couple of quotes in each of those. Then realizing, well, I've got a lot of favorite quotes that reflect nature and care for the world and care for each other. So I've actually incorporated 51 quotes on this map around the border and then the two compass roses, and from a variety of sources. Everybody knows John Muir, I'm sure, and people along those lines, but I've got everything from our Minnesota boy, Bob Dylan, a couple of quotes from him, to Edgar Allan Poe, to Albert Einstein.
This is a real project of love for you, isn't it, really? If you're incorporating all the things that mean something to you, then the map says something about you as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it does. Making it kind of a piece of artwork and a piece of what I would think is the experience of individuals hiking on this trail, it becomes more than just a map. It's kind of part of the experience.
I'm looking down at the picture I've got right now. It's got a large section on the left-hand side of information for hikers, and it's the biggest box on there. I think it's similar size to the legend. So, tell me what that contains, because I literally cannot read it right now.
Well, it gets into recognition that you're driving private land and the necessity for respecting that. It's not just a hiking trail. You can go off and wander all over property in sections.
Absolutely.
In Minnesota, there's hunting seasons, so you got to be aware of sections that might be closed, or if you're out there, you need to wear orange during deer hunting season.
They said that on the Appalachian Trail as well, but I must say I rarely saw anybody wearing orange, but when I did, they certainly stood out.
Yeah, and some of it's just kind of generally, if you're near one of the state parks, they get quite busy in the summertime, and you can expect a lot of other people out there, and the use of the parking areas. Mud and bugs are issues up here, but I always think back to I'm kind of a lover of explorers and read a lot of books, and you think about what those guys experience, not even having a trail, they're just out in the wilderness, dealing with all these kinds of issues.
Yeah.
So we have it really pretty nice, even though you're walking through mud and getting bitten by mosquitoes.
Well, this will certainly brighten your day. I've got to tell you, this is such a beautiful, bright thing. One last thing I wanted to ask you about it was that you've got the two compass roses. There's also what looks like a club, a pack of cards, a club down the bottom left-hand side by Duluth. Got that bit?
Yeah.
What's that?
That's my map logo.
All right.
So, in Minnesota, aspen trees are an important forest resource. We've had paper mills all over the state, so I've put the aspen leaf in the middle, and it's surrounded by two oak leaves, kind of representing the succession of the landscape and how trees take over. Aspen tree is a short-lived tree, and an oak tree is a long-lived tree.
Well, I tell you, I appreciate you having a quick chat with us about this. This wasn't supposed to be a shameless plug for Keith's maps, although I'm sure he'd love people to buy them. It is a recognition that something, as soon as I opened it, I thought it was absolutely beautiful. And if anybody's interested in this trail, where could they buy it from you, Keith?
It's going to be, it already actually is in a number of stores in Minnesota, Midwest Mountaineering, Duluth Pack Store in Duluth, Trail Fitters in Duluth.
Can they get it online?
I've got a website online, but you have to go to my email and contact me directly.
Okay.
So if people Google KJMYRMEL, my website would pop up.
Okay. And your email address, can you give your email address out or not?
Yeah, it's my full name, Keith Mermel @hotmail.com.
Okay. That's lovely. Well, thank you so much for that. As I say, I think it's beautiful, and I think you've done a fantastic job. How you had the patience to be as fine as this, I have no idea. But I admire anybody who could do it.
Definitely a fun art project for me.
I'm sure it is. Okay, well, thanks so much for talking to us, and hopefully people buy a couple off you.
Thanks. Appreciate it, Steve.
Cheers then. Bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. How interesting and how painstaking to be able to create something like a 13 feet long map with instructions for hikers and Bob Dylan quotes and everything. That is a mindset that I simply don't have, so I really admire those who do. We had a funny 5-star review this week. Confused Alien, why do they get these names? Confused Alien is very nice about the show, but it wasn't that drew my attention. He says, on a side note, Steve is also great off the show. I emailed Mighty Blue. Did you see that? I stopped being Steve. I emailed Mighty Blue with questions and he graciously carpet bombed me with helpful info. I then asked him a detailed question about whether I should go with Pack A or Pack B. He took the time to send me a thoughtful reply about why I should go with Pack B. So naturally, I went with Pack A. He then goes on to say, I picture me on the trail someday with 3 extra pounds of pack weight screaming at the sky, why oh why didn't I listen to that English guy? Serves you right, confused alien. No wonder you're confused. That made me laugh. Just before we go, I've been meaning to ask you all for a favour. I know that I share my weekly episodes on the various hiking Facebook groups and we get around 15,000 downloads every month. Yet I know that loads of people don't know about the show. If you enjoy it, and if you're a member of any other hiking groups on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Pinterest, please spread the message and let your network of friends know about the show. It's the best possible price, free, and more people listening encourages sponsors to support us and keep the program up and running. Also, while I think about it, there's a Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail Facebook page, and I know that a lot of you are already liking that page. Feel free to like the page and friend me, Steve Adams, on Facebook, or follow @ATMightyBlue on Twitter. Next week, we have another vintage generation hiker hitting the trail in the class of 2018. Bill King is a former teacher with a wonder of everything to do with nature. He's fulfilling his dream of hiking the AT this year, and we're going to catch up with him before he sets off. Don't forget to support Trailtopia at trailtopia.com, and remember that Bruce Matson at rtkchallenge.com has already set off on his journey. Follow him on iTunes as well. Earl Schaefer is now really moving on, and this week we're up to Chapter 11 of Walking with Spring. He crosses Stratton Mountain, which was a memorable spot for me. Then he has a couple of wildlife encounters, first with a spiky old porcupine, and then a particularly feisty mother mink, who gave Earl a real spraying all over his clothes, which I would imagine he really needed being a dirty hiker. He also experiences a rare sound in the woods that fills him with wonder. I'll see you next week. Chapter 11, Mansions of Green. The long trail north over ridges green, 'neath skies of bonny blue, with many a sylvan lakeside scene, but sometimes rugged too. Moving along from Blackington, through brush still wet from the rain, I came in the twilight to Seth Warner Camp, a closed shelter with a chunk stove inside. One of the bunks even had a mattress. The night was rainy and it was nice to be under a roof. Next morning, the lone expedition came to Camp Kumash on the shore of Sucker Pond. This beautiful little lake is part of the water supply for the town of Bennington, in the Westward Valley. Sitting on the cabin porch was Bob Quackenbush, keeper of the reservoir. He was delighted to see me and immediately put the kettle on for tea, reminding me of the New Zealanders in the South Pacific. Bob had the look of one who is much alone and attuned to the ways of nature. He showed paw marks on the wall of a raccoon that sometimes came inside. He laughed when told of the one in Palisades Park. His family lived in Bennington and he went there on weekends but stayed at the camp most of the time. It had been built by men from Cooper's machine shop. One man who came by one day afterwards sent a letter addressed to the man who lives on the mountain. The letter was delivered promptly. Bob said that Sucker Pond had originally flowed to the east, away from the town, but a 7-foot-high dam turned its outflow the opposite way. He rowed me out to take pictures. After a while, 3 boys came along and they hiked with me as far as Thendara Camp, where we met a man who was frantically slapping insects, and no wonder. He was wearing shorts and tennis shoes only and had no bug dope. He was checking the shelter, intending to bring his nephew for an overnight stay, a clear case of the blind leading the blind. The boys, Charles Lessier, Don Haczynski, and Fred Tatro, turned back while I continued on to Hamlin Hill, a fern-covered summit overlooking Bennington. During the Revolution, the Green Mountain Boys fought there to prevent the British from capturing a powder house and other vital supplies in one of the crucial engagements leading to Burgoyne's surrender. The official flag of the United States, containing 13 stars and 13 stripes, was first flown in battle at Bennington. The town is also known for the beautiful old pottery made there, for the collection of Grandma Moses paintings, and the display of Amberina glass in its museum. From Hamlin Hill, the trail crossed Molly Stark Highway, then followed a brook to Fay Fuller Camp, a closed stone cabin containing 2 fireplaces. Someone had left some candles and magazines, a temptation that caused me to read until midnight and again in the morning before leaving. The dirt road beyond Fay Fuller Camp dwindled to a path up a ravine to Glastonbury Camp, where I stopped to cook. 2 men came along, one a veteran who said he had been over the mountain at least 100 times. The other was the bug man of the day before, now wearing a shirt and using bug dope. A few miles farther was Cornawagga Shelter, built by Boy Scouts and presented to the Green Mountain Club. Later, I stopped to photograph the stone marker at the spot where Daniel Webster stood when addressing a Whig Party gathering in 1840. About 15,000 people attended. A colourful sunset was flaming high as I reached Webster's shelter on the slope of Stratton Mountain. The water supply was difficult to find and swampy. Black flies were bad but held in check with a smudge fire. Fire Warden Barrett came along in the morning and we walked up the mountain together. He said that fishing was good in Stratton Pond and offered some line and hooks, which I declined with thanks. Fishing and long-distance hiking don't combine very well. The top of Stratton Mountain affords a fine view of the Green Mountains north and south, and Benton Mackay told me he was perched in a tall tree on the summit when he got the definite idea for the Appalachian Trail. And Mr. Hinkle and 2 boys came by and walked along with me to Stratton Pond, where a youngish couple was staying at the lodge. The little lady declared she had long wanted to hike the AT all the way and asked a lot of questions. The man, who was as big as she was little, stood by, frowning. Mr. Hinkle and the boys turned back while I started around the lake. The man and woman were quarrelling before I was beyond earshot. At Stratton View Shelter, I was sitting on the Deacon's Bench, the cross timber at the lower front of the lean-to, pondering whether to stop early, when a rowboat started from the lodge, rowed clumsily by the little lady. The man was coming around by shore. When they got there, I was gone. At Bourne Pond, a deer was out in the shallows, pulling up and eating water lilies. Porcupines were gnawing at an abandoned house nearby, making sounds similar to a horse fiddle, that horrendous noisemaker often used in the old days at chivalries. The porcupine is also despised for an obvious reason, those nasty quills. In the twilight, I arrived at Sweezy Camp, an abandoned and run-down loggers' camp. The door was about to fall off, and the stovepipe was missing, which wasn't all bad since the smoke discouraged insects. Supper was cooking, more or less, when a scratching came at the door and a beady eye peeked round the corner. Then old Porky himself strutted in, with every quill raised. My verbal invitation to leave was ignored, so I ushered the critter out with a stick. Down the trail, a short distance in the morning, I met an old man and his 2 grandsons. They had been on a fishing trip, staying at a place near Sweezy Camp, and were going home to Manchester Depot. Needing supplies, I tagged along. The old gentleman owned some of the woodlands we passed. We discussed the various trees, their values, and the methods of getting them out of the woods. Back on the trail I came to Snow Valley, an elaborate skiing centre with runways downhill on the western slope, then came to a cross-mountain highway under construction. A car was parked there and 2 young men were stowing gear in the trunk. They had been working on the road and staying at Bromley Lodge, but couldn't dig straight post holes and decided to quit before they were fired. They were going back to the lodge for more gear, so we walked together. Then they decided to celebrate meeting me by cooking a last meal before leaving. The way those college fellas started a fire was a sight to behold from a distance. First, pour some gasoline from a bottle into a dish, dump it into the chunk stove, and back off while lighting a match. The result was a ball of fire, a roar, and a dancing stove. After recovering my power of speech, I told them they wouldn't start many fires that way. The food they produced would have fed a small army. Then out came dish towels, Brillo pads, scouring powder, and various other aids to successful housekeeping. No wonder they needed 2 trips to carry out their gear. Bromley Ski Resort had many trails into the valley, some with colourful and appropriate names such as Twister and Shincracker. At the top was an essential part of any ski centre, the first aid station. I peeked in a window and noted that a porcupine had chewed a hole in the floor, a favourite way of gaining entry. The usual ski lifts extended to the valley. Downhill skiing is almost like flying, very enjoyable, if you don't have to come back up the hard way. North of Bromley Mountain was a section of Green Mountain National Forest, a picturesque region of heavy timber and isolated peaks. Shelters in the forest were built of massive logs, and 3 of them were spaced within 10 miles. The first was Mad Tom, and the second Griffith Lake, where another porcupine approached me boldly while I was cooking and wasn't easy to chase away. At that time, they were protected and had become a pesky nuisance. Since then, their status has changed, and they are not as numerous now. For almost a week, the weather had been good, practically a record. The morning sky was vivid blue, spotted with billowy clouds. Sometimes the path crossed swampy spots on corduroy, unlike so many places where you just slogged through. After Old Job's shelter, the trail crossed a scenic highway and followed a woods road to a little rocky pond. Except for the easy access, this is one of the nicest spots along the AT. The lake was fringed with evergreens and the water was azure blue, said to be so deep that a bottom has never been found. The lean-to was on a small rocky island, reached by a rustic wooden footbridge and facing the open lake. The lake was classed as experimental fishing waters and was stocked with rainbow trout. Mid-afternoon shadows were slanting across the rippling waters when I finally persuaded myself to leave. This place tempted me to break my rule of travelling every day. I've been back several times, once staying overnight when a full moon was shining and wind clouds were crossing the sky. Greenwell Shelter was only 5 miles away, but marking was faded and I made a wrong turn, finally arriving at the lean-to by starlight. The spring was several hundred yards away and difficult to find in the dark. Next day I met people coming into White Rocks, a high lookout, then crossed abandoned farms and a wide intervale to Buffum Shelter. Some fishermen had just finished dinner and were about to leave. One was toting a half-empty jug of Stone Fence cider, which I politely but firmly refused to sample. After cooking my own dinner, I cruised past an abandoned lumber camp and over a ridge to Clarendon Gorge. The choice here was to descend and cross the canyon or detour to a flimsy footbridge. A regular suspension bridge has since been built, but often is damaged by spring floods. I crossed the gorge, not trusting the footbridge, and came to Clarendon Shelter. A man was sitting there reading a book. He was interested in my boots and said he had never found any that withstood the grueling conditions of trail travel and was currently trying paratrooper boots. Much of his hiking had been in Maine, where footgear gets a real workout. Since Governor Clement Camp was only 6 miles away, I didn't stay. In late evening, while on a stretch of trail along a brook where high water had washed out the path, I was surprised by a large mink and a kits scattering into the brush. But one remained on the path, twitching its nose and watching me with beady eyes. The mother clucked anxiously from behind some driftwood, but the kit wouldn't go. The lighting was poor, but I tried for a picture anyway. When the shutter clicked, that little rascal ducked as though it had been shot at, crawled under some weeds, opened its mouth wide and began to squall and squeal. Out came the mother, quick as a flash, jumped over to the little one to make sure it wasn't hurt, jumped back in the brush and clucked some more. The kit just lay there and screeched. The second time the mother came directly with obvious intent. As she leapt toward me, I caught her on the nose with the toe of my boot, turning her over. Up came a tail, and she turned on the spray, like her cousin the skunk would have done, gathered a litter, including the squealer, and herded them away without a backward glance. My clothes smelled minky for several days. It wasn't funny to her, but it was to me. Near sundown I came to a nice stone lean-to, name forgotten. In the morning the grass and brush were wet and my clothes and gear needed attention, so the start was delayed. I took time to restitch the boots and applied dubbing, sew a ripped pants leg with the baseball stitch, and take up the pack straps a little. Such a routine occasionally helps keep things together. By noon I had crossed the flank of Killington Peak and came to Cooper's Lodge, a nice stone cabin honouring Charles B. Cooper. A man and a woman came up the side trough in the direction of Rutland on their way to the summit. Then I called up with 3 boys and walked with them until an approaching thunderstorm sent us in headlong flight to Long Trail Lodge in Sherburne Pass. Knowing the Appalachian Trail turned eastward from Sherburne Pass and finding no marking, I started on the highway. The storm became a cloudburst and muddy torrents soon were rushing down the roadside. Still seeing no marking, I decided to follow the road round Gifford Woods State Park, through which the trail definitely passed. There I signed the register, then talked to Grace Barrows, the first and only lady ranger met on the long cruise. She told me that the lean-tos in the park were available for a nominal fee. But several hours of daylight remained, and I decided to keep going. Mrs. Barrows misunderstood and always blamed herself for my going. She told me years later that she never charged a thru-hiker after that, regardless of regulations. This park had the reputation of being one of the finest and best kept in the US. Actually, I should have stayed. Faint blue marking at the highway indicated the beginning of the missing link, the hurricane-wrecked and nearly obliterated section east from Sherburne Pass. The cloudburst had flooded the meadow, with water knee-high on the stream bank and waist-deep when I waded across. Beyond the meadow, a sign at a road pointed toward the village of Sherburne. On the far side of the village, a boy was playing in puddles. When asked about the trail, he referred me to the hired man, who was in the barn milking the cows. The hired man sent me to the grandfather of the house, a bright-eyed old man with a snowy thatch of hair who told me the trail probably turned between there and Sherburne. Meanwhile, the lady of the house had noticed my wet clothes and weary condition and urged me to stay overnight, seconded by the grandfather, who said the storm was not really over. How right he was, but I was bound to go on, not wanting to impose. A faint blaze on a tree marked the turn up an old woods road up a ravine. Blowdowns and brush began to obstruct the path as twilight deepened. It was time to stop. Finding a flat place by an old stump, I set up the half-wigwam shelter and started a fire against the stump, while rain began falling again. Spruce boughs were gathered to keep me off the wet ground. The fire was difficult to start, but set the stump on fire and was difficult to put out in the morning. During that dreary night, I heard for the second time in my life the awesome sound of a giant tree falling somewhere in the stillness. Long dead and weighted by soaking rain, it had finally crumbled. This is something that many lifelong woodsmen have never heard. Now I knew why I hadn't stayed at Sherburne. Next day, the woods road dwindled to an overgrown path and then dense thickets and young timber, with marking faint but traceable. On the far side of the ridge, someone had crashed through with a jeep, which helped. Finally, I came to a sawmill clearing and was astonished to see an old trail sign on a logger's shack, designating No Town Camp. It looked as though porcupines had been the only occupants for years. The woods beyond had been nearly clear-cut a few years before, resulting in dense growth, but a faint blue blaze every mile or so kept me going down a long, straight valley eastward. Then marking disappeared, and the only way to proceed was by dead reckoning, compass in hand, which brought me to Barnard Gulf Road near the trail crossing. From this point, the trail was maintained by Dartmouth Outing Club and was in better shape, except that their marking, alternate red and white bands, was faded and difficult to identify. At night, I stopped at a ramshackle barn, found some hay in a mow, and slept there during a thunderstorm. Had a strong wind come with the storm, I would have moved out, since the structure looked ready to collapse. Because of wet brush and lack of marking, I followed a country road past Pomfret to West Hartford and intercepted the trail there. Marking was better beyond, and so was the weather, with progress more rapid to Norwich. First stop, as usual, was the grocery store. For the first time, powdered milk was available, which meant a slight saving in weight. Before this, my milk was canned. My arrival at Norwich had been too late to pick up mail, so I crossed the Connecticut River and continued through Hanover, missed the turn-off to Velvet Rock shelter in the darkness, and slept in a roadside woods, returning to Norwich in the morning. At least I had gotten the missing link behind me, and it hadn't been as bad as expected. My equipment was showing definite signs of wear, and so was I. The moccasin boots were cracked and misshapen, but holding together. The frame pack was smoke-stained and getting shabby. The cook kit was dented and black on the outside. The poncho was faded and slightly torn. The rain hat was floppier than ever. The burlap bag was black on one side from wrapping around the cook kit. As Whittier said of the Deacon's masterpiece, there was a general flavour of mild decay, but nothing local, as one might say. Still ahead of me were some of the most rugged and remote sections of trailway, over the timberline in the White Mountains and through the wilderness of western Maine. But in many ways this kind of travel is easier than the backyard wilderness variety, where the best route is often not available. The nasty dogs and the 4-lane highways are few and far between, but so are the grocery stores. Poison snakes are no longer a threat, but bear and moose can be under sudden circumstances, and insects can be exceedingly obnoxious. Yet these are a part of the free wild way of the wilderness, the natural hazards.